Welcome back to my channel, guys. In this video, just as you saw on the thumbnail, I'm going to share with you how to sew this bustier dress with this rose design in front. So I'm using a crepe for this. I use 3 yards of crepe and 1 yard of the sky blue or the rose design. So here I'm starting with marking my starting point. I want to draft the skirt part first. So what I did is draw my starting point and I marked the length of my skirt. It's a dress, that's a gown, but we'll be cutting the skirts first, which is exactly what I'm doing before we cut the upper bodies, right? So I marked the full length of my skirt and I am going to, from my starting point, which is my waistline, I came down by 9 inches to mark my hip because this is for a plus size. And then I came down and I marked my knee measurement as well. And then I'll take my circumference. So on my waist, I marked a quarter of my waist plus my seam allowance, and then I added 1 inch for my dart because I want to put it that. All right, then the same thing for my hip, a quarter of my hip plus my seam allowance. And then on my knee, what I did is what I had on my hip, including my allowance, I just removed 1.5 from it and placed the value on my knee, right, to give it like a fitted, more like a fitted effect on the knee area. Okay, so the same thing I did, what the value I had of on my knee, I also brought it down to my hemline and I connected all the points like so. So this is for the skirt, pretty much easy and straightforward. I will use, this is the front parts, by the way, so I'll use this to cut the back. The only difference is that the back is going to be two-piece and it's going to have a zipper allowance, and then of course you slash the midpoint of the center back into two to make it two-piece, all right, because you'll be attaching a zipper at the back. So I just cut it off and I'll be using this, like I said, to cut the back, which is what I am doing now. I just placed, put in another fabric and place the front that I already cut on top of it. Make sure I have space for my zipper allowance, and then I cut everything out. Now the skirt part is ready. We'll now go over to cut the upper bodies. Here I was just trying to measure my dad, but I realized I wasn't really necessary because I was still going to attach it to my body, so I'll definitely match the that on my bodies to the skirt part. Okay, so I just make sure it matches. So we're done with the skirt part. Here I was just slashing through the center back, like I mentioned, that is going to have a zipper at the back. So once I'm done with this, I just set this aside and then we go over to cutting the upper bodies, which is the bustier, right? So here, of course, the bustier is an off shoulder, and what I did now is to mark my starting point. So on that starting point line, I took away 6 inches. I think I did 6.5. Yeah, I did 6.5, or you can do 6 inches or even 5, depending on how off you want it to be. So just place your tape where you want it to be. Yeah, I did 6 inches, and then from there I marked my bust point, and then my underbust, my my bust point, my underbust, and then my waist, including the seam allowance. Okay, so I'll just use my ruler and just draw out these lines very well. So once that is done, I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and take my bust span, which is nipple to nipple. So I marked my bust span is the bust span I'm working with is 4 inches, which is nipple to nipple is 8 inches, but I actually marked 4.5. This is because I was cutting directly on my fabric, so I marked it all the way to my starting point, and then I'm taking my das on my waist. I took 1 inch on both sides of my waist. I also took the same value, 1 inch on both sides of my underbust, and then I'm going to connect it to my bust point. And then I also did my over bust tightening. I also took 1 inch on both sides of my over busts, right? And I'm just going to connect this das, and like I always do, I like to go up by half an inch and come down by half an inch from my bust point, just to eliminate every pointiness before I connect my darts, which is exactly what I did. So I'll just connect my dart legs like so, and yeah, we're done with the dart intake. Now for my neckline, what I like to do is I like to mark. It depends on how off you want it to be, right? So what I do is I mark my shoulder measurement, but I take away 1 inch or sometimes 2 inches from it, okay, and mark it, and then make sure you add back the darts you removed from your upper butt, your over bust tightening. For your over bust, add it back so you don't have any shortages, and then you add back um add the allowance for joining the dart back, which is 1 inch, right before you now add your seam allowance. Okay, now I've done that, and I've ruled a straight line just to connect it to my chest line to be enable me create my armhole curve. So what I did on the chest line is to mark my bust circumference, okay, so the quarter of my bust, and then I added the dart, like I measured that intake you have on there, you add it back, add 1 inch to join the dart, and then 2 inches or 1.5 for seam allowance depending on what you want. After doing that, I just created my armhole curve like so, and then I come to my waist, and then I do the same thing, the quarter of my waist. I impute the value, and then I add back the dash, which is 2 inches, 1 inch on both sides, which makes it 2 inches. I add 1 inch to join the dash, and then I add my seam allowance. I think I used seam allowance of 1.5 for both the bust and the waist, so just do what works for you. And then connected it, and that is what it looks like. Then for the shape of the neckline, you can decide to do sweet hands or leave it straight, or just do rounds, whatever you want. Here I think I did a little round shape. So on my starting point, I just came down by 1 inch and then curved it up to that first that is facing towards the folded area, like so. All right, so that is it for the front part of this bustier, and go ahead and cut this out, and then we'll do the back. I'll just try to blend the sharp edges on my that area before I cut it out. So I wasn't really cutting everything out because I wanted to use this one as a template, more like, yeah, to cut the back so that I wouldn't just go over and start drafting everything all over again. So I just placed it on top of another folded fabric, made sure I left about 1.5 inch at the folded area for my zipper allowance for the back. And what I'm going to do is to just, you know, mark out my starting point and then the length of the bodies, mark out the zipper area, just using it as a template or as a guide, so to say. So what I'll do is, once I get the lines that I want, just take it off and then go over my measurements. I hope you get it. So what I'll do now is to just mark out the same thing I did for the front, which is I remember I told you I used the shoulder measurement minus 2 inches. Okay, that's what I used. And then I marked out my chest line there, marked out my shoulder measurements from on my starting point, my minus shoulder measurement minus 2 inches. Okay, and then I marked out, connected my armhole, and then on my chest line I did a quarter of my bust, and then my seam allowance. Then for my waist, a quarter of my waist plus 1 inch darts, because I'll be pinching and sewing on the darts, and then I'll add my seam allowance and then just connect the line. And that is it for the back, literally. So just mark out the darts and I'll notch it. So go ahead and cut this out, and yeah. What I like to do to my back bodies is to eliminate bulginess. I mark half inch at the down part and slash it to the size like this and cut it off from 0.25 to half inch depending on the size. I also do the same thing on the zipper area, slash it all the way to the upper part. This helps the back to lay flat. All right, so I'm done cutting the back. I'll just go ahead and now cut out the darts of my front. So I'll cut the facing of the back and the front, but the facing of the front will come after I've joined the darts, so that is just one piece. So I'll just set it aside and just cut the facing for the back, and I'll go ahead and sew up this all these pieces, join my darts, sew it to the skirt part, and just sew everything up, and I show you what it looks like. And then the next thing to do is attaching the sleeves, and then making the fabric rolls for the front part. Okay, so I've done just that. I attached everything including the zipper. What's left now is this the sleeve, which is just going to be a little strap. Okay, and I'll cut out just a rectangular strap that I'll fix, and then I'll finish up the armhole with my bias tape. So this is the rectangular piece that is going to be on fold, and I'm going to just measure it out. For the width, I did 5 inches, 5.5. So by the time I fold, it'll be about 2.75 or thereabouts. And then the length is actually 8 inches plus 1 inch seam allowance, which is 9. Okay, so I'll just join it, turn it to the right side, and then attach it to the sleeve opening, and then finish up the rest of the sleeve. Either I interlock it or I use my bias tape to do the finishing. Then this fabric is what I'll use for the fabric rolls. So I've done the sleeve thing, I've attached my sleeves. Then let's get to the fabric rolls. So I have a long strip of this fabric. It depends, this part is really very, very optional. It depends on how bold you want it. I didn't want mine to be very bold. Okay, so just work with your discretion. Okay, the length and the width is totally your discretion, but make sure you trim this edge like I did. Okay, just curve it out like this. It's on fold, as you can see, so both ends are curved like this. I go ahead and sew it to the back. Just hold it in place to the back with my machine, and then I'll, after doing that, I left a space at the middle part where I'm going to just turn it inside out, and then I'll, press it so that it lays flat. Okay, and once I'm done pressing it, I'll take it to my machine, and I'm just going to sew it, and I'll pleat as I sew. So once you're sewing, you're pleating, and yeah, after doing that, you're going to, have something like this. And then the next thing is to now, make the rows just like this, but you'll be needing your needle and your thread, because you'll be doing some tacking from here. So get your needle and the thread, and then start folding, and as you fold, you tack, just go ahead and do all of that, and take your time with this. Just fold and tack just to hold everything in place. And after you're done with this, you'd have your fabric rows that you now, tack it down to the dress, or wherever, yeah, to the dress, upper part of the dress. Okay guys, if you've watched up to this point, you're the real deal. Please, thank you so much. Click on the like button, subscribe to this channel, drop a comment. It just helps, to push this content out so that more people can see it. Thank you so much. So this is what I had after I did all the tacking, and then I attached it to the dress, and voila, that's all for this tutorial guys. I hope it was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.